Awesome. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My name is Shannon Watson. I am the Executive Director of Majority in the Middle. Majority in the Middle is a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We work to equip and empower respectful and effective civic and political engagement. And today we're here to share our 2025, the State of Bipartisanship report. The report is designed to analyze bipartisan bill authorship as one effective reflection of collaboration. This effort identifies where cooperation happens, elevating the people who are leading the way, and collecting replicable ideas for a healthier political environment here in St. Paul and in state capitals around the country. The 2025 session offered a vivid reminder that legislative dynamics are rarely linear. When looking at 25 versus 23, two seemingly contradictory trends emerged side by side. More bipartisan-led bills were introduced and heard in committees in 25, suggesting a growing appetite for cross-party collaboration, as well as a recognition that shared authorship can help bills gain traction in a tied chamber. Those stats went from, in the House, from 20% in 2023 to 35% in 2025, and in the Senate from 31% in 2023 to 39% in 2025. Individual legislators also rose to the occasion. 192 of the 201 legislators carried at least one bill with a co-author from the other party. That's like 95% of the legislature. And when sole authored bills are excluded, this is my favorite stat in the whole report, 70 legislators had bipartisan co-authors on at least half of the bills they carried. 70 of the 201 had at least half of the bills that were bipartisan this year. Now, at the same time, a higher percentage of bills with only Republican authors were introduced in both bodies. That makes sense. And the percentage of bills that were solely authored by DFLers was lower than in 2023, but it was still more than a quarter of all the bills. So you can see that these trends are not mutually exclusive. They reflect the dual pressures that legislators face in a politically divided environment. So on the one hand, the structure of the ties incentivized cooperation, which means bipartisan bills are more likely to be enacted. And on the other hand, the current political environment doesn't reward bipartisanship. So the legislature is navigating two realities at once: a procedural need for collaboration and a political impulse towards division. The result is a session where more bipartisan work is visible, but so is the sharpening of partisan identity. This tension is not a flaw of the system, but a feature of governing in a moment where trust is fragile, incentives are shifting, and every bill carries both policy and political weight. So some things to know about the report. Our first report was in 2023 that uncovered the baseline and uncovered what we call hidden bipartisanship. That's the collaborative work being done on legislators on bills that isn't obvious when bills are presented only by the chief author in committee, and final votes of large omnibus bills fall along party lines. Our 2025 report, because we do have bienniums, was the first opportunity for kind of an apples to apples budget year to budget year comparison of bill introductions and committee hearings. And obviously the power dynamics between 23 and 25 were very different. In 23, the DFL held a trifecta, control over the governor's office and both chambers of the legislature, while 2025 will likely be remembered as the year of the ties. Something else to know about the report, where although comparisons will naturally occur, this report is not an effort to label legislators as best or worst. Bipartisanship is complicated. Bill authorship is just one measure. It is something that is highly objective and totally defendable. And since authoring legislation is essential to legislators' job, it is an important measure, but it is not the only measure. In the report, we do try to elevate some best practices and recommendations that came from our observations, current and former legislators, staff, lobbyists, other members of the public, and we elevate these to try to make the legislature a better place to get work done. The first best practice that we noticed, several bipartisan bills were co-presented with members of both parties at the testifier table in the House and the Senate. Senator Heather Gustafson and Senator Michael Kroon in particular consistently demonstrated a highly visible partnership throughout the session. And we encourage bill sponsors and committee chairs to continue this practice where it's relevant. The second thing, we have talked in the past in this report about the importance of the seating arrangements in committee. And we applaud House Children and Families co-chair Representative Nolan West for alternating the seating arrangements when he held the gavel in that committee. Because mixing members by party, instead of putting all the Republicans on one side and all the DFLers on the other side, it actually does encourage relationship building, bipartisan collaboration, and more productive conversations during committee. Lastly, in the Senate, during those 3 weeks of the tie, gavels were held by co-chairs. But after the power sharing agreement was dissolved, some committee chairs upheld previously scheduled, now minority-led hearings into the following weeks. And they continued the practice of passing the gavel to the minority lead when the chair was unable to preside. This is a visible sign of bipartisanship and trust, and is especially important when it wasn't required by a power sharing agreement. So we hope this report will accomplish two things. First is to give support and acknowledgement to those legislators who are working across the aisle. We see you, we thank you for your work that often goes unnoticed and unappreciated. Keep it up. Second, to the public, despite what you may see on social media or from political campaigns, not all politics is divisive. Not every legislator sees enemies on either side of the aisle. And if you look hard enough, you can see good work that's being done behind the scenes. Legislators often hear from people who are really happy or really unhappy about an issue. They hear from advocates who are passionate volunteers who are being paid to persuade them. They hear from political staff, campaign operatives who want them to toe a party line. They don't often hear from constituents who solely want compromise and collaboration, which polling shows is what the majority of Americans say they want. So the best thing you can do, if you are a member of the public and this is something you value, the best thing you can do to support legislators working across the aisle is let them know that you care about bipartisanship and then support them with your voice and your vote. And if bipartisan cooperation is something that you'd like to model, we encourage you to run for office because this work needs more champions. So with that, I'd like to turn the podium over to the people who have been doing the work we're reporting for their comments, and then we'll take their questions. Just a note on who's here. I invited a handful of legislators who were either called out by name in the report or who had, again, not a ranking, but who had the highest percentage of bipartisan-led bills. This is not to diminish anybody else's work. Many, many legislators could have been standing up here today. We are limited by the time on our room reservation and the fact that it is interim and these people do have other things to do. So I will hand the podium over to whoever would like to go first.
You guys go. Yeah, you're like the poster children.
I'll go. It's the Democrat is here. Okay. Thank you. I'm Heather Gustafson. I represent SD 36. It is 9 cities, but largely Vadnais Heights, White Bear Lake, and Lino Lakes. Bipartisanship isn't just a feel-good headline, and it certainly shouldn't just be a political slogan. It's about survival. Minnesotans are facing enormous challenges in deeply uncertain times, and the only way to protect our people and keep our democracy strong is by working across party lines. That's how I view bipartisanship. We've got a tied House, unprecedented pressures from Washington. Gridlock is not an option here in the state of Minnesota. And we have seen the chaos and extremism and the fighting that's gone on in DC and the shutdown where 20,000 Minnesotans are out of jobs. People are facing uncertainty in services and programs that they rely on for things like food, healthcare, and we could do better than that here in Minnesota. So there are many issues like the safety of our children and families that are core values for everybody standing up here Minnesotans will be better off if they can work with that common ground toward real solutions, which is one of the driving forces of why I really choose to make meaningful bipartisan relationships with my time in the Senate. We need to put people before politics, especially in moments of crisis, and that's hard, really hard thing to do. It's a hard demand, especially with everything going on, but it is what Minnesotans expect. And everybody who is up here understands how important it is to build those relationships, and that's why they're being recognized today. So I want to appreciate my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who step forward and do this work, and they leave their egos at the door, and they just get into the policy and the real reason that we're here. So again, I'll just finish with bipartisanship is not a luxury. It is not only what we need to do as a responsible way forward, but it is our only choice, especially here in the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Senator Michael Kroon, represent District 32, which is Blaine, Ham Lake, Lexington, and Columbus in Anoka County. I'd like to first thank Shannon and Majority in the Middle for putting this event on and for all of their efforts that they've undertaken the last couple years to try to bring bipartisanship to the forefront. I think that's really important work, so thank you for that. You know, when I think about bipartisanship, there's a couple of components. One, there's the process of bipartisanship, which is really important, but the most important thing is to come into this job with a bipartisan mindset and, you know, to represent all of your constituents. And that's something that I've really tried to focus on. I come from a background of collaborating on the school board before I was in the Senate, and I made a concerted effort to try to bring that mentality with me into this job. But that doesn't mean you are just down the middle on every issue. We all have our values, we all have our positions that we come to this job with. And I'm, you know, speaking for myself, I've been a Republican since I was about 8 years old in 1984. You know, I remember supporting President Reagan's reelection campaign. And so as you would expect, I hold all of the traditional Republican values that you would expect me to hold. You know, whether it's limited government, freedom, you know, free enterprise, or, you know, all the other ones, supporting law enforcement, protecting the innocent, constitutional government, all of those things. And I bring those values with me to this job, and I ran on those values. I talked about those values in my campaign. But another thing I brought to this job is a certain sense of humility. And I realized that I don't know everything about everything. And with a job of this magnitude, I think it's impossible to know everything about everything. And so you have to be humble enough to know that. And so that you go out and you ask questions, you talk to a lot of different people, including people that disagree with you. And you build those relationships. And that's what I think is a bipartisan mentality that you bring to the job that allows you to represent all of your constituents. And there is, of course, a bipartisan process as well. And I'm learning that as I go along. I'm in my first term. And I think that really came to fruition this year. I did have a lot of bipartisan bills in prior years, but this year I think I really understood what that process needs to look like. And really it's about establishing relationships and building trust. And it's not, obviously building trust with members of the opposite party is very important. But it's not just that. You have to build trust with members in your own caucus if you really want to be a true bipartisan legislator. And you have to build trust with your constituents, including your base. And you have to have regular communication and transparency with all of that, your constituents, members in your own caucus, and members in the other caucus, if you really want to do this job well. And I think that is demonstrated by the Office of Inspector General bill that Senator Gustafson and I worked on together all year long. It was a very heavy load, but it started with a relationship and building trust between the two of us. And as it turns out, I couldn't ask for a better bipartisan partner on this bill in the road that it took. We started meeting every Tuesday night with other members, bipartisan, bicameral, with staff, knowing that we wanted to be serious legislators and come up with a good product. That was always what was driving us, to solve a problem, to come up with a good bill. And then we went through like 11 different committee stops. And at each point of the way, we were inviting other members to come in and provide input. We were inviting the public to come in a very transparent way and provide input. And so that, to me, is how you do it. And Senator Gustafson then invited me to co-present the bill at committees, which probably had been done before, but not during my time, not that I had seen. And she didn't have to do that. But I think by doing that, it gave a lot of credibility to what we were doing. And I think it set up our bill for success in the Senate and co-presenting it on the Senate floor. So, that's my experience on what a bipartisan process looks like. So that's kind of what I think of. But again, thank you to Majority in the Middle. Thank you all for coming and covering this important topic. And thanks, everybody.
Got to hear from the House. Bicameral and bipartisan.
First, thank you for being here, but also thank you to my colleagues for their comments so far. I think you hit on a lot of, the humility, the trust, working together, sitting at the table together, and just working through the process. So I really appreciate standing up here with you. Also, I want to thank Majority in the Middle and Shannon for outlining, I think, a crucial part of what goes on up here at the legislation. And I think it's important how we pass these bills, but it's not easy. I think each of us would say it's not easy always trying to work bipartisan. But what I will say is Minnesota expects us to work together. True bipartisanship begins with relationships. I've always believed in relationships. In my time as a school resource officer, I learned the importance of building trust. In my time serving in law enforcement, I saw firsthand how collaboration keeps communities safe. Even working after I retired at Ace Hardware, I experienced how connecting with people matters. And now, in the legislative, that same principle applies. Connecting with one another and working together leads to the best solutions for the people we all serve. I want to share a story about my first term that illustrates why these relationships matter. I was a freshman. There was a school resource officer bill. And I got a call from my relationships in law enforcement about some issues. And I partnered with my Senator Zach Duckworth, and we extended our hand and asked to work on a bipartisan solution. And it took us a little while to get there. But once we got there, I remember the first day of session, and my hand was always extended, and I never went partisan, and I always talked about bipartisan solution. And the first day I got called up to then Speaker Melissa Hortman up to the dais, and I thought, okay, I'm in trouble. And I got up there, and what she taught me and what I learned in this process was she goes, I'm grabbing your hand. We don't have someone who's been a police officer. We don't have anyone as a school resource officer. And we'd like to work together to find some common ground and solutions to this problem and obviously bring some votes in. Well, the neat part about all of this was we brought all the stakeholders, we talked, we worked through this together. And in the end, we came up with a solution that works today and improved the process. And when you find that common ground and you find solutions, not everyone gets what they wanted. And that is what compromise is about. And I think that's the best legislation. And so I just want to say thank you. And I've learned a lot up here, and I think I'll always trust my relationships. Thank you.
Anyway, thanks. I'm Jim Abler from Anoka. Pleasure to be here. Pleasure to hear Majority in the Middle and Shannon Watson and her crew begging for what the average Minnesota is hoping we can get around to do. I've had the privilege or challenge of being in 14 elections. So I probably have knocked on more doors and been more out there than most people here. And so as I even did a statewide race, and they didn't buy what I was selling, but that's a different story. But as I drove around the state, was talking to people, and as I've been around the different versions of my districts, people want us to work together and get something done. And I think the error of some people is that they really, they want it to work, but they don't know the details. They trust us to do it, and they find themselves floundering as they watch the news, both Washington and St. Paul. You know, and I just wanted to commend, I thought they should go first because they really had the most obvious bipartisan effort with the Inspector General, given that fraud is such a big deal. It's in the papers every day. I'm on the Human Service Committee, and we've been discussing this. It's not new. It's 20 years old as an issue. And there are dishonest people everywhere. And so how do you find a way to solve that? Their bipartisanship was amazing, and it was kind of tragic that it failed on a partisan vote at the end. It was ready to go, strongly done. In the House. It had very strong support in the Senate, 60 votes. I mean, it's not a gadfly bill. So yeah, I want to remind you of that. And so what I think majority in the middle is asking, are there people in the legislature who are courageous enough to vote for what would be the best thing and not the most partisan thing? And I can tell you when they get to that point, there's a lot of pressure from everywhere. But are we electing people to be courageous and defending Minnesota and all that we believe in with our freedom and our education and healthcare and the environment and all the energy and all the things that we have to think about? That's the challenge. And I think that Ms. Watson made it very clear that when someone does that, at least tell them thank you. And then you'll get more of it. That's what we need. The pendulum has swung far to partisanship either way. And the middle has not been involved in the legislative process, in the partisan process, and even to be around. I think what the majority in the middle is saying, they matter. You matter. Please come be a part of this great government. Minnesota has a chance to be the most amazing state and government anywhere because of the richness of the people, quality individuals like behind me, and the work of the people that are truly calling that out. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions?
I've got a few. I'm sure you've heard this from constituents, probably in the last month, people who say, you need to fight. You need to fight against the other side and stand up for us, your constituents, your party, and they don't want you to compromise. They want you to take in. What's your message to them? Does it depend on the issue? Does it depend on what? Like, how do you handle it?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. I think you can do two things at once. We were just talking in the back room about a text message I got from my dad where he was like, I just want you guys to fight back. And then literally the very next text message was, I want you guys to get along. And so yeah, you know, you've got one foot in each of those kind of mindsets, but and I hope it's okay that I'm sharing this, but like tonight, we're going to the homecoming football game at Centennial, and it's going to be Senator Kroon and his wife and my husband and me, and maybe the House members are joining us, I don't know. But the point is like we can all we'll disagree on a lot of issues, but I think if you can start with a place of just, you know me, you can trust me, we might not vote the same, but we can at least have a respectable working relationship like that every other Minnesotan does in their place of work. And that's it. I think for a lot of us behind me, and in those people who aren't there too, when you have so many new people that come into the legislature, you don't know who you can trust. You know, you don't know if someone's up to something. You have to really like kind of put yourself out there and, you know, be a little bit vulnerable with people from the other party who are actively trying to make you lose your job. And so you have to, you know, you do have to have that, a little bit of vulnerability to just say, I promise I will not, you know, you can trust me. I will not hurt you on this. I just need you to tell me how you feel about it. Is there a shot that we can pass this? You know, I didn't come here to make enemies. I came here to do my job, and everything I've ever done before I got into office has just taught me to try to at least be in a working friendship with everyone. And I think that that is ultimately what people really want. So if that answers your question. Yeah.
I think it's a great question, and it is a practical, it's a reality that we live with. How I look at it, number one, when you're talking to your own side about some of these things, you have to be transparent. To me, that's the key, and you have to communicate with them regularly and let them know what you're up to, what your approach is. Ideally, when you're running for office, but even after once you're in office, to have those regular communications. They may not always agree with what you're doing, but if you communicate with them and they understand what you're doing, their chances are they're still going to support you. So that's what I've found. And the other part of that too is, as it relates to the other side, when, it's like fight for your cause or whatever. And look, I'm not immune to that by any stretch of that. I do that. But it's usually when I find the other side isn't listening after repeated efforts to collaborate, and all you're left with is drawing a contrast. Okay, then that's the point where you need to be the loyal opposition party to draw a contrast between different policies. So, but I always try to collaborate, and I'm always willing to collaborate, and only when that doesn't work do I resort to that. That's kind of what I do. I want to be easy to work with and hard to work against. And so that's kind of my approach.
Oh, that's fine. You want to talk? Okay.
Okay, another question?
Go ahead.
On this process, I moved here from 10 years in Colorado, and there, one bill is one thing. And here it's kind of blown my mind trying to track how legislation happens. I think that for the public, it's hard to follow a policy from committee to just disappears in this netherworld, and then it comes back at the last second. But there are upsides to it too. Things make it in that might not have the support of the majority on their own. What role do you think this legislative process that we've landed on here has to, as it relates to bipartisanship? Does it make it better? Does it make it worse?
Sunshine is the best disinfectant. And if you've been watching, especially the last few years, it began not just in the last 3 years, but before things became more and more opaque as more and more meetings were private. And the real meeting is when the chairs get together with the governor and then they craft whatever and lay it out to the people. But even at that, back 10 years ago, there was at least more of a piece-by-piece process so you could see it. This last several years has been, really horrible, ending up with what happened last year with a 1,433-page bill that only a few people had seen, and they even stuck one bill in that they put in by accident, which didn't belong there. So, it's not even constitutional, but it's practical. And it's evolved over time, and it needs to devolve. But so if it were done out in the open, so you're going to put 6 bills together, and now we're going to have a hearing for 2 hours about this one and that one, that would be better, but it's not that way. The last 2 big health bills that came through were done in private. I was a conferee on one. I didn't see it till it was released to the public. And that's what that's the biggest egregious part of it. And the topic state government is not a title to cover 10 topics. And so, again, if the people in the middle, the people who are out there going, what are you doing? The silent majority, stop being silent. Say, what are you doing? And it would begin to unravel. They're not going to go away all the way, but they would become much more transparent. That's my opinion.
Thank you for that question, because one of the things I talk to, especially when I talk with my constituents, omnibus bills I get are a convenience thing, but it is very difficult when there's 60, 80 things in there, and maybe, 80% you agree with, 20% you don't. And I'll give you an example. My freshman year, my very first bill, I reached across the aisle with Representative Edelson on a carjacking bill, which we had an increase at the time. This was going to help curve it. Great bill. I was very proud of it. It gets stuck in an omnibus bill, and guess what? I couldn't vote for it. that's my very first bill. And you're helping out Minnesotans and your communities, and you don't vote for it because of other things in the bill. I saw a recent interview with Representative Pulowski, who's been up here for many years. And he said that the process is broken. Last year alone, I think over 5,000 bills through this place for 201 of us that are going through. We got 7,000. So I'm only off by 2,000. I apologize. But we can do better with that process. And I think if we limited some of it, and some of it has to have that bipartisan signature on those bills, it might help with the process and limit how many we can do as we go through it. But the way it's going now, it does make it very difficult to see where people actually stand on some of this legislation.
Yeah, I can't let a question about omnibus bills go without answering. I could be here all day, Tom, and I just encourage you to go to my social media accounts, because that's kind of a pet issue of mine. But I'll just only comment insofar as it relates to bipartisanship. Representative Whitty hit the nail on the head. You can work on a lot of bipartisan bills with a member of the other party. You could be the chief author of that bill. And the way that the omnibus bills are abused here, you could end up having to vote against your own bill. And I've had to do that many times. I've had to vote against my own bills, and that doesn't feel good. I don't like voting against my own bills, but because how omnibus bills are abused, that sometimes happens. And I think that discourages bipartisanship. So that's one thing, and also public trust. If people can't understand what's going on in the legislative process, and they can't get transparency, and they can't get accountability from their elected officials, they lose trust in their government. And when people lose trust in their government, I think you do tend to see more extremes emerge from that process. So I have a lot more to say, but I'll leave it at that.
So one thing I will add about this, so in 2024, we did focus on the issue of omnibus bills. And one of the omnibus bills is the challenge that these guys were talking about, where they wind up being packaged with quote-unquote poison pills. And what that does is, it's because you're not going to be rewarded for voting against something bad, or against something good. You're only penalized for voting against something bad. So until voters make the distinction that, okay, Senator Kroon took a quote-unquote bad vote. Why did he take the bad vote? Why did he vote against this thing? Well, it was because it was packaged with that other thing. Oh, okay, that's totally reasonable, and not letting that lit piece drive the conversation and drive sort of the outcome of that. I think that's still going to be a thing. The other piece of it is when we are reporting on the outcome of bills and we talk about things passing party line vote, every single omnibus bill almost passes party line vote, then that helps fuel the narrative that we are 100% divided, we are 100% opposed up here, and that's not actually the case. Pulling out the things that we can agree on, like I said, we're never going to get rid of omnibus bills entirely, but one of the recommendations that we have made in the past is pull out the things that you have bipartisan agreement on, run those standalone, because then not only does that remind the public that, yeah, there's stuff that we agree on, it also reminds members of the legislature.
Big issue right now, violence prevention, school safety, and it seems like Republicans and Democrats agree on many things in this space, mental health, funding for school security, and there's no agreement on guns, as far as I can tell. So how do you find some compromise here, folks? You're talking a big game.
Yeah. Rock, paper, scissors.
I'll take that one. So when it comes to school safety, I'll revert back to kind of what I said before. I approach things to solve problems. I'm not out here to do political grandstanding. I do very little of that. That's not what I'm about. And I would never use a human tragedy to score partisan political points. I try to be careful to not do that. And so I haven't been super vocal on this issue. But I would bring it back to what I said about the bipartisan legislative process and how you can get a true, good bipartisan bill that actually solves problems and what that takes and what has to go into that to make that product. And so when you're talking about a special session, as we are right now, special sessions are good for certain things. They're good for when you run out of time in budget negotiations and you need a little bit more time, but you've been doing that work all along. You need a little more time to tie up the loose ends. That's been done lots of times in this state. Or if you have like a natural disaster and you have broad consensus within the legislature and it's a time-sensitive situation, you bring us in and we vote on that, get the funds where they need to go. And that makes a lot of sense for a special session too. But with this issue, it's a little bit different. Yes, there is a urgency to school safety. There's no question about that. But is there the consensus? So what I would like to see, if we are going to be talking about a special session, is to move on the things that do have broad consensus and that will make an immediate impact. Okay? Don't hold those things up because you can't get immediate consensus on a hotly contested issue that goes back decades, that's been intractable for decades. You don't hold up the bipartisan consensus issues that can make an immediate impact for that because you want to make a political statement in a special session. That's not what the special sessions are for. So one example could be safe school funding, extending that to non-public schools. I think there's broad consensus on that issue, and it could make an immediate impact, and that would be a good use of a special session. You have an existing program. It's a dollar amount that needs to go to an existing program to add the non-public schools to it. That's something that seems to me that could be ripe for a special session. My hope is that we wouldn't choose to not do that because it must be packaged with a hotly contested issue that will take time if we are going to find a long-term bipartisan solution to that. It's going to take a normal legislative process. And I'll even give you one more example. I favor an SRO in every single school building in this state. But even that's probably not ripe for a special session because while we could come up with the funding for that in a special session, there isn't necessarily the law enforcement personnel to fit all of those positions. And so we're going to have to take a broad look at that in terms of licensing issues, in terms of recruiting issues, in terms of encouraging retired law enforcement. And there's a lot of issues. Law enforcement would absolutely need to be at the table. Other interest groups would need to be at the table. And you need the regular legislative process to come up with a successful bipartisan solution on that issue. So even like an issue on that I agree with, not right for a special session, absolutely appropriate for a regular session. And I look forward to being a part of bipartisan talks on all of these issues when we resume back in February.
All right, I feel obligated. So I was on the gun violence prevention work group, and I will say that it was one of those moments where we really did try to bring in some bipartisan support in a genuine way, at least from me, and was disappointed we couldn't get there. One of the things that I wanted to highlight was that, you know, what I talked about earlier, where you have to prioritize building those relationships. We could not get any of the Republicans to even agree on a concept of a plan around guns. And I agree with my colleagues. We can put more funding into mental health. We absolutely should. We can talk about school safety and how that might look different in a policy year. But we also, it's a three-legged stool. We also need to address guns in some way. Now, some of these bills may never get support from the other side of the aisle right now. I understand that. But I truly believe, and I said so in the committee, you know, you guys, you know me. You can trust me. We can find some common ground. It will take time, so I don't know that a special session would allow us enough time to actually do those things that we want to do. But I know that I just, maybe I'm being naive, but I know that there is hope in finding some common bipartisan ways forward that do also address guns. But it's going to take probably relationships like the ones that you see up here, where you can tell people that, let's actually talk about this. This isn't for social media debate. This isn't to try to score political points. This is because Minnesotans are asking us to take this seriously. And if we can just get inside of a room and talk about what it is that we can do and can't do, and then all I want to do is know the rules of the game. And so then we can work together to try to figure this out. But we really did try just to get them to vote on a concept of a bill, and we were shot down every time. So I do think it is important to remember that these issues, they have to be handled correctly, but they also take both sides coming together, so, yeah.
We got to learn to respect and trust the process. And I think that's what's missing right now. The best legislative solutions come from deliberative processes of committee hearings, which allows the public feedback, expert testimony, and improvements to proposed bill language. So as my colleagues have said, that takes time. Rushing to a failure in order to score cheap political points won't keep our kids safe. A long-term solution can only be achieved with bipartisan and good faith collaboration, and the best opportunity for that is the upcoming session when everyone can participate in transparent and public discussion about keeping our kids safe. We do not have all the police reports. We would not have our key stakeholders at the table right now. We must and we can find bipartisan solutions to, with everything up here we and everyone agrees with, protect our students, provide care, and then punish the criminals, because it is a multifaceted, from just speaking from a law enforcement, and this isn't something, as my colleagues say, we do overnight.
I think they said it all.
Other questions?
You ran out.
I got one more and then we go. Happy
Yeah.
weekend.
Yeah.
For all of you, tell me about a time you thought your party was wrong about something.
They were never.
I mean, it's not a really glamorous example, but I will just use the most recent special session that we went to where there was an issue so I care very much about local control of and property taxes and Anoka County and Ramsey County. This is why I'm here, right, for those people. And so there was a discrepancy, there was a change in the way that we were going to fund transportation that would have pulled away county dollars. And it was Senator Hoffman and I who really went to bat for Anoka County and the commissioners in Ramsey and Washington County as well, and just said that we have to protect these dollars. In that situation, I think there was well-intended ideas, but I think that was one place where the DFL, at least those authors with the current status, might have missed the mark. So always happy to fight for, my district comes first before my political party. And that was a moment where I thought that they might have gotten it wrong, so.
Well, one issue that I often disagree with my own caucus and my own party on is the subject of term limits for state legislators. My party favors them, and I say this job is probably not good enough where it's needed. Washington, yes. St. Paul, not needed. You look at the average lifespan of a legislator here in St. Paul, it's not that long. So we have some good-natured debates about that issue.
That's a good question. It's Friday at 2 o'clock, and we're supposed to get to softball, and that wasn't the softball. Thank you. There's a lot of times you might not agree, and that's why you have your caucuses, and you talk about how do we come up with a solution to the problems. I'm 100% on the term limits. We are up here to serve our communities, and we're a voice, and that voice should continue to change around. In each election, you guys are lucky it's every 4 years for you, but every 2 years for me, the voters and my neighbors in the district get to decide that. And, it's a difficult thing, but sometimes having new voices, new experiences, new viewpoints on things can change how things work. So term limits, but I do think there's a lot of times when we're discussing bills where you're at the point going, I don't like that stance. We talk through it. I think that's the best way. You got to communicate, and however that looks. And if we can communicate through our caucus, we need to continue to communicate on the floor and really be open to listening to these arguments.
Well, thanks. Term limits, absolutely. 31 years. That's what they should be.
You're the exception.
Just to that thing, in 2011, we had a deficit of $6 billion. And it would have been my 13th year. And I always thought 12 years made sense, and that might be a number of people agree on. But it took everything I knew, working with Governor Dayton and Commissioner Jessen and then the Senate, to find a way to reduce spending by $1 billion and not have anybody come to harm. So there's expertise you lose, and the more you go into term limits, the more the staff runs the place. And just to caution you about that, but I think 31 years is a great number. Things that, I was trying to think of what I disagree with my party on, and I don't have time to give you a list that long. But I try to vote as the people would have me vote. And if you look at my voting record, I try to respect partial credit. And I think if both parties could do better respecting partial credit, and instead of all or nothing, and is there a way to make this better? I was just listening to a doctor and research, and there's some people that are kind of dogmatists. They know that this is how it is. And there's people that are interested scientists who then like, well, tell me something new. What can I learn? And I think part of how I vote like I do is I try to always learn. I think these people up here are good exemplars of learning. And I think to help the people in the hinterlands that are in their parties and those that are in the middle, like, help us learn, help us do a better job, and then actually take that learning and apply it. That's the part I wish we could do better. Thank you.
So I'm going to answer a question because I don't have a party. But one thing I did want to mention before we're up, and I know we're out of time, is that my favorite thing about this press conference is the amount of giggling that is happening up here, because it's very good natured, even when people disagree. Like, that's what seems to inspire the giggling. And that is what we need more of. Senator Gustafson mentioned the federal shutdown and the gridlock in Washington. This is the exact opposite of that. The opposite of a DFL trifecta is not a Republican trifecta. The opposite of any trifecta is a tie, and is two parties that can work together and figure it out and balance the budget and get the work done, and then giggle about it at a press conference. So I think that is where Minnesotans should be really thankful for the government that we have and the people who are doing the governing, and get involved because we need more of it. Awesome. All right.